The sun was sinking behind the bleachers, bleeding its last gold into the dust-choked arena. It should have been the end of the night, just another rodeo wrapping up, but no one had moved. Not yet. At the center of the ring stood Eban Crowell, a bull the color of dried blood and thunderclouds. He was a legend and a curse. No rider had ever stayed on his back for more than 4 seconds. He didn't buck like the others. He attacked. And after tonight, he was done. The truck to the slaughterhouse was already parked behind the barns. The announcer's voice crackled through the speakers. Final event, Eban Crowell. Say your goodbyes, folks. But then, something strange happened. A man stepped into the arena, not from the chute, not from the staff gate, but from the crowd. He walked slowly, like every step weighed 100 pounds. His boots dragged the trail through the dirt. A long coat clung to his frame, and silver-gray hair curled beneath a battered hat. His beard was thick, and dark glasses shielded eyes that hadn't seen in years. A low murmur moved through the stands. "Is that Eban Crowell?" The name rolled like thunder across the crowd. People hadn't heard it in over a decade. Eban had once been a rodeo legend, not for riding, but for whispering. They said he could calm any animal, anytime. Until the wreck that blinded him and took him out of the world entirely. Now he stood face to face with the most violent bull the arena had ever known. Eban didn't flinch. He raised one hand slowly into the open air. His voice came low and steady, like a prayer whispered to old ghosts. "You're still breathing that fire, Eban." The bull stomped once, head low, muscles coiled. The handlers reached for the gates. But Eban didn't charge. He stared. Eban stepped forward again, unshaken. "I knew one like you once," he said. Raised him. Same fire behind the eyes, same silence. "You carrying that weight now?" The crowd was silent, paralyzed. Then something impossible happened. Eban lowered his head. Eban reached out, slowly, hand trembling. And the bull, this monster no one could touch, let the man's hand rest on his face. Gasps rippled through the arena. Nobody knew what they were. Watching, nobody could explain it. But in that moment, the deadliest bull in the county stood still as stone, and the blind man never looked away. The arena emptied slowly, like a church after a funeral. People walked in silence, glancing back at the ring as if they'd witnessed something sacred or something they weren't meant to see. No one clapped. No one spoke above a whisper. Eban Crowell, the bull once known for breaking bones and spirits, stood calmly at the far end of the pen, as if the fire had drained out of him, and Eban Crowell was gone. Just like that. Slipped into the shadows the same way he'd entered them. Behind the bleachers, rodeo owner Ward Callan paced in front of the staff tent, his cell phone pressed hard against his ear. His face was flushed, not with excitement, but with confusion and something dangerously close to fear. "No, I'm telling you." He barked into the phone. He just walked in. The bull froze like a statue. I don't know what the hell it was. Some kind of ... trick? He stopped talking for a moment, listening. His jaw clenched. "No, I don't want the papers calling this a miracle. It's bad for business." Across the gravel lot, near the old pickup trucks, Leaf Cray sat on a feed bucket, his eyes still wide, trying to process what he'd seen. Leif was young 26, sharp, full of fight, but tonight had shaken him. He'd never believed in stories, not ghosts, not legends. But whatever happened between Eban and that bull wasn't normal. It had stirred something deep in his chest that he didn't have words for. "I swear," he whispered to himself. That bull bowed his damn head. Somewhere out past the main gate, hidden between rows of trailers and broken fences, Eban Crowell moved with silent certainty. He didn't need a guide. The sound of the wind, the smell of sawdust and leather, the feel of the gravel under his boots, all of it told him where he was. He stopped beside a rusted livestock trailer, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. His hand trembled slightly as it found the inside pocket of his coat. He pulled out a worn photograph creased at the edges, faded nearly white. 2 boys, a ranch, and a calf with a white stripe across its nose. He didn't say a word, but the memory hit like thunder. That calf, it had been named Oren. Back in the holding pens, the handlers stood around the bull in stunned silence. Oren Maddox didn't buck, didn't growl. He simply stared at the far gate where the old man had vanished minutes ago, as if he was waiting for something or someone, and no one dared to move him. The photo in Eban's hand felt heavier than it should. Though his fingers couldn't see the image, they remembered every line, every fold, every crease in the paper. The boy on the left, slightly taller, missing his front tooth, was Eban at 10. The smaller one, clinging to a calf with bright white markings, was his younger brother, Jonas. That calf had been a gift from their father the day he left. "Raise him right," the man had said before disappearing down the long road out of Crowell Hollow, never to return. And the name the boys gave the calf? Oren. He never forgot that name. Or the way Jonas used to sneak out at night just to sit with the animal, feeding it scraps, whispering into its ear like it was a secret keeper. They'd raised him together, the 2 of them, on a patch of dirt and stubbornness. Eban had always been the quieter one. Jonas had fire in his blood. But the bond between boy and bull, that had been something sacred, until the fire took the barn, and Jonas, and the calf. Vanished. Years passed, but grief never aged. Eban drifted from town to town, working horses, breaking in cattle, until a bucking bronc took his vision and forced him into silence. He disappeared from the circuit, just as legends do. But in his chest, something unfinished kept pulsing. Not guilt grief left unspoken. He'd heard stories of a violent bull on the rodeo scene, one with no handler, no history, and rage in his eyes. And when they said his name was Oren Maddox, something deep in Eban moved. Back at the rodeo grounds, Ward Callum stood with his arms crossed as 2 of his senior handlers argued. "I'm telling you, boss," one said, "that bull, he ain't right anymore. It's like he's waiting on something. Just standing there, calm." Ward spat on the ground. "That bull's got 1 ride left in him, then he's done. I don't care if he grew angel wings. I want him in the chute tomorrow." His voice was steel, but his eyes betrayed him. He'd recognized that name too, Crowell, and he'd buried that history for a reason. Leaf Cray watched from a distance, arms resting on the top rail of the pen. His gut told him something ancient was unraveling in front of them, like a knot tied too long ago. He didn't know who Eban really was, not yet, but he knew this wasn't about rodeo anymore, that it was about memory, and something that refused to stay buried. They never found records on him. That's what made Oren Maddox so feared and so valuable. Most bulls came with pedigrees, birth dates, bloodlines carefully tracked by breeders. But Oren, he just showed up. Bought in cash by a man who vanished after the sale. No brand, no name. Just a black bull with eyes that burned like old coals. Ward Callan had taken him in out of curiosity. "A beast like that don't need a story," he told people. "He writes his own." And he did one broken rider at a time. But behind closed doors, Ward kept things closer to the vest. He knew more than he let on. He remembered the fire on that cold October night 30 years ago, the Crowell barn in flames, the boy who didn't make it out, and the calf white-striped, black hide gone without a trace. Rumor was the calf had survived and been sold off during the chaos by a neighbor needing quick money. No one connected it to the monster in the pen now, except Ward, and he'd never speak it aloud. Back in his trailer, Eban sat in darkness, though he no longer knew the difference. He ran a calloused hand across the old photograph again, tracing Jonas's outline like a ritual. The voice of Oren from the arena echoed in his mind. Not the snort, not the hooves, but the breath. It was the same rhythm, the same pause before the exhale. "You remember me," he'd said, and deep down, he knew the answer. That wasn't just a bull. That was their bull. But how could something raised in love turn into something raised for killing? Leif Cray walked the outer pens with slow steps. He'd heard stories about bulls snapping, going rogue, refusing handlers. But Oren was calm, watchful. It was as if he knew something the humans didn't. Leif approached cautiously, stopping a few feet from the gate. Oren didn't move. His eyes locked on Leif, then drifted slowly toward the far fence line, where Eban had vanished hours earlier. Leif felt a chill he couldn't explain. This wasn't instinct. This was memory. Inside the main office, Ward lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. He pulled a dusty ledger from the bottom drawer, flipping past old invoices and rodeo permits until he found a small stained page. A sale receipt, one name written in faded ink. Seller, Hiram Gentry. Buyer, W. Cowan. Animal, one black bull calf, no brand. Price, $60. Date, 2 days after the fire. Ward stared at the page for a long time. "Damn it, Eban," he muttered. "You should have stayed gone." The wind carried a faint chill that night, the kind that didn't come from temperature, but from memory. Eban Crowell sat beneath an old oak behind the stock pens, his back resting against the bark like it was something familiar. In his hands, the photograph lay unfolded again, though he no longer needed to see it. His fingers knew every ridge of the paper, every ghost printed on it. The image of Jonas, the little calf, the crooked smile, all of it lived louder in Eban's mind now than it ever had when he had sight. That night at the arena had cracked something open in him, something he'd boarded up decades ago. He remembered how Jonas used to hum when he brushed Oren, a soft, off-key tune. Said it calmed him down. Said the calf understood music. Eban had rolled his eyes back then, teased him about it. But now he could have sworn he heard that tune in the way the bull breathed earlier that night. Like some part of Jonas had stayed alive, carried forward through Oren's body, or maybe through the silence between them. And Eban couldn't shake the feeling that Oren had recognized him too, not by sight, of course, but by sound, by soul. Down. In the bullpen, Oren Maddox stood alone. He hadn't eaten, hadn't moved, just watched the fence line. A younger handler tried to approach with feed, but the bull gave a low grunt and stepped back. Not aggressive, but unwilling. It was clear to anyone watching. Oren was waiting. But for what? For who? That kind of behavior didn't exist in rodeo bulls. Not ones bred for chaos. Unless he hadn't been bred at all. Inside the rodeo office, Ward Callan drank from a chipped coffee mug filled with something far stronger than coffee. He stared at the old receipt again. His hand hovered over his phone. He could call the press, spin the story. Blind man calms killer bull. Sell it as a miracle. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't divine. It was unfinished. The past, clawing its way to the surface. And if people knew what he'd done, what he'd helped bury, it wouldn't be just Oren facing slaughter. In the shadows beyond the barn, Leif Cray watched Eban from a distance. Something about the old man drew him in not pity, but curiosity. Respect, maybe. Leif had lost his own brother young. He never talked about it. But tonight, watching Eban holding that photo like a lifeline, something clicked. Whatever happened between that man and that bull wasn't about rodeo. It was about something broken that was trying to find its way home. By morning, the story had already spread. Not officially, not through papers or broadcasts, but through mouths. the kind of whisper that moved faster than trucks or phone lines. By noon, folks were stopping by the rodeo grounds just to peek through the fence. They didn't want to see the bull anymore. They wanted to see him. Eban Crowell, the blind man who calmed a beast no man could ride. Some called it a miracle. Others called it witchcraft. Most just called it unnatural. Inside the diner across from the fairgrounds, a small crowd gathered at the corner booth. Coffee, mugs in hand, heads leaned in, voices low. He was always off, one man said, even back in school. Heard he talked to animals like they were people. A woman chimed in. Didn't he lose his brother in that fire? I heard, he said it. The cook, wiping his hands, added, no proof. Just stories. But people don't disappear for 15 years unless they're running from something. Eban heard none of this, but he felt it. He'd lived long enough to know when a town was turning its head. Even when it smiled, the tension was there. In the air, in the gravel underfoot, in the too quiet way people stepped aside as he passed. That morning, he walked to the barn to hear Oren's breath again. But Ward's men had moved to Bull, isolated him. One of them, a young handler with too much ego and not enough sense, called after Eban as he passed, voice taunting. Hey, whisperer, you gonna talk this one to sleep too? Ward Callan, meanwhile, was on damage control. The local news had caught wind of the blind bull tamer and wanted interviews. He gave them nothing. He didn't want attention. He wanted control. And a band's presence threatened that. There were things Ward had buried in this town. Deals made. Lives affected. A band's return was like digging up bones you swore you'd hidden deep enough. That afternoon, Leif Cray approached Eban quietly. He'd been thinking about the photo, about Jonas, about the fire. That bull, Leif said carefully, he ain't. Just any animal, is he? Eban didn't answer at first. His hands were resting on the fence, his head tilted toward the wind. Finally, he spoke soft but sharp. He remembers. That's all that matters. But not everyone wanted memories stirred, and not everyone believed the man they used to call a ghost was ever meant to come back. The pen was quiet. Too quiet. No handlers, no shouting, no movement. Just Oren Maddox, alone in his enclosure, pacing. In slow, deliberate steps. The dust rose gently beneath his hooves, swirling like smoke each time he exhaled. He hadn't eaten again, refused water, wouldn't respond to the prods or whistles of the handlers. One of them, frustrated, had even thrown a bucket into the pen. Oren hadn't flinched. He just stood, staring at the far gate, waiting. Eban Crowell leaned against the weathered wood fence a few feet away. He didn't speak right away. He knew rushing this would mean nothing. He had spent his life learning the value of silence, listening to the patterns between sounds. And now, as the wind moved across the plains, he felt it again, that same rhythm, the same breath Jonas used to hum to, the tune only Oren ever responded to. Slowly, Eban began to hum it again, a cracked, broken version. But the melody was there. Inside the pen, Oren stopped moving. His ears turned toward the sound. His shoulders relaxed, and his chest lifted as if exhaling some ancient weight. And then he stepped forward, not in fear, not in aggression, but like something had returned, like something he had been waiting to hear had finally come home. He moved to the edge of the fence, inches from Eban's outstretched hand, and for a brief moment, they stood still, man and beast, years apart, connected by a thread no one else could see. From behind them, a voice rang out, sharp, bitter. Ward Callan, this ends now, he barked, storming toward them. That animal's due in the chute tomorrow. No more sideshows. No more ghosts singing lullabies to cattle. Eban didn't turn. He kept his hand on the rail, his voice calm. He's not yours to break, Ward. Never was. The words cut deeper than Ward expected. his face twisted, not just in anger, but in guilt. He remembered that fire and what he'd done after. He'd seen Oren in the wreckage, knew what the bull meant to those boys, but greed was louder than memory. And silence, back then, had paid better than truth. As Ward turned away, Leif Cray stood nearby, watching it all unfold. He saw something in Eban that the others refused to see, not madness, but memory, not weakness, but recognition. And for the first time, Leif questioned who the real animal was in this place, Oren, or the men who claimed to own him. Say a stiver. Tudo certo. Diga ok. I sigo con o capitulo 8, Buried Truths and Broken Fences. Estu pronto para continuar. Vocadis, isso agora o capitulo 8 com 6 paragrafos, e com 480 palavras. Chat GPT dis. Perfeito. Abexo, esta o capitulo 8, Buried Truths and Broken Fences. Com 6 paragrafos e aproximadamente 480 palavras, revelando segredos do passado que conectam definitivamente Eban, Ward e Oren, enquanto o clima de confronto e revelação comica. A chegar el limite. The sky was overcast that morning, casting a muted gray over the rodeo grounds. It felt fitting, like the world itself was holding its breath. Eban Crowell stood by the back fence, where the land dipped into a hollow he hadn't walked in over 30 years. The ground there still smelled like old ash. The fire that took. The barn in Jonas had left scars deeper than smoke ever could. He knelt slowly, his fingers brushing over the soil, remembering where the gate used to hang, where the calf used to sleep, and where the night everything changed began. Not far away, Leif Cray walked with a clipboard, pretending to take inventory. While watching Eban from a distance, something was unraveling in real time, and Leif couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't about a rodeo bull or a blind man. This was about a wound left open too long. And as he watched Eban trace the past with his hands, Leif made a choice. He needed to know what happened that night. Really happened. Back at the main office, Ward Callan sat at his desk, staring at a photo that had fallen out of an old ledger. The night before, it was faded, curled at the edges. 3 boys in front of the Crowell barn, Eban, Jonas, and a younger Ward, smiling with arms slung around each other. Before the fire, before the silence, before the lie. Ward's hand shook as he folded the picture and shoved it into his coat pocket. He told himself 100 times over the years, they never would have made it. The calf wouldn't have. Survived anyway. But it wasn't true, and deep down, he knew it. That evening, Leif found Ward near the stock pens, lighting a cigarette with unsteady hands. Why didn't you ever tell him? Leif asked quietly. Ward didn't answer. He thinks that bull is just a miracle. But it's more than that, isn't it? Ward looked away, his jaw tight. I thought if I told him the truth, he muttered, it'd kill what little was left of him. Or maybe, Leif said, it's the only thing that could bring him back. Meanwhile, in the holding pen, Oren Maddox paced restlessly. He had begun to snort again, but not with rage. With agitation, like something in the air was changing, like the balance had shifted. When Eban approached the gate that night, the bull stopped, lifted his head, and released a long, low breath. It wasn't the sound of threat. It was the sound of recognition. The crowd came early that morning. Word had spread far beyond town lines. It wasn't just locals anymore. Reporters, ranchers, even tourists lined the rails, all drawn by the same impossible rumor that a blind man had calmed the bull with no master, that the beast, once destined for slaughter, now stood still at the sound of a voice. They didn't come for the rodeo. They came for the story. And stories, Eban knew, had a way of twisting themselves around truth until you forgot how they started. Eban. Crowell stood near the chute gate, hat in hand, boots coated in fresh dust. He had asked for one thing: 5 minutes alone with Oren. No ropes, no riders, just him and the bull. Ward Callan had resisted, but the pressure was too great. Cameras were rolling. Eyes were watching. A refusal would look like fear. So he agreed. But the look he gave Eban as he signed the release form wasn't of a man surrendering. It was of a man preparing for the worst. Inside the pen, Oren Maddox waited. He was tense but not wild. His hooves shuffled in the dirt, but his head was lifted, ears angled toward the gate like he knew who was coming. As Eban stepped inside, the crowd held its breath. Leaf stood by. The fence, hands gripping the rails, jaw tight. He hadn't told Eban everything Ward had confessed the night before. Not yet. He knew this moment wasn't about revenge or proof. It was about release. Eban walked slowly across the ring, humming that old tune under his breath. The same broken melody Jonas used to sing to the calf so long ago. Oren didn't charge. He moved forward, one heavy step at a time, until they stood, face to face in the middle of the arena. Eban reached out, hand trembling, and rested his palm against the bull's broad forehead. For a long, silent moment, the world stopped spinning. "I failed you," Eban whispered, barely audible over the wind. "You and him. I let the world turn without us. I let you become something you never should have been." His voice cracked, but he kept going. "But if there's anything left of the boy who loved you, I'm here. I'm not running anymore." From the edge of the crowd, Ward watched with narrowed eyes, but even he couldn't deny what he was seeing. The bull this monster bred for. Fury closed his eyes and leaned into the old man's hand. It wasn't showmanship. It wasn't magic. It was forgiveness. The arena emptied slowly, as if people didn't quite know how to leave. No one clapped. No one spoke. There had been no performance, no ride, no triumph in the traditional sense. Just a man and a bull standing together in silence. But somehow, it had moved everyone in a way no rodeo ever had. Some left in tears. Others stayed behind, just to watch the dust settle where something sacred had passed through. Eban Crowell remained inside the ring for several minutes after Oren walked away on his own, calm, unchained. He ran a hand over his beard, face lifted toward the wind. In that moment, he felt something he hadn't known in years: peace. Not because the past had been erased. It hadn't, but because it had finally been faced. What remained of Jonas lived not only in memories, but in this moment of connection. And in Oren's quiet submission, there had been something more powerful than words. A kind of absolution. Later that evening, Leaf Cray sat with Van near the back fence, where the land dipped down into Crowell Hollow. The old photograph sat between them, warm but whole. Leaf finally spoke. "Ward told me what happened after. The fire, that he sold the calf, took the money. He didn't mean for it to become what it did." Eban nodded slowly. "None of us meant for any of it. But meaning doesn't change what's real." He tapped the photo gently. "That little boy loved without fear. I lost him the moment I stopped believing that love could matter more than pain." Across the grounds, Ward Callan sat in his truck, alone. The radio was off, the windows down. He stared at his own copy of the photo, the corners curled and edges stained. He hadn't spoken to Eban since the arena. He didn't have the courage, but he'd watched the way Oren responded to him. It haunted him not just because it proved Eban was right, but because it reminded him of who they all used to be. Boys, with dust on their boots and stars in their eyes. Before shame and silence grew louder than truth. In the days that followed, Ward pulled Oren from the rodeo circuit permanently. No final ride, no retirement auction. Instead, he left him at a nearby sanctuary under Eban's care. The crowds disappeared, but the peace remained. The headlines faded, but the bond, what had once been broken, held steady. And in the quiet fields beyond Crowell Hollow, Where the fences stood mended and the grass grew wild again, Eban Crowell walked without a cane, led by memory, not fear, because some things don't need to be seen to know where the light still lives.